Good evening. My name is Dr. Gary Shaffer, and I have the pleasure of serving as Director of Libraries for the City of Glendale, California. This program is part of our series, Be the Change: Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Anti-Racism. Be the Change events build collective understanding of systemic racism, elevate the voices and stories of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and inspire our communities to be the change. The series is supported by the City of Glendale Arts and Culture Commission, and you can learn more about Be the Change at glac.info/BeTheChange. I'm excited to be hosting today's event in honor of Women's History Month, Rosie the Riveter Day, and the United Nations International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. I'm happy to be joined by Betty Reid Soskin. Betty is a San Francisco Bay Area-based civil rights activist, musician, author, blogger, and pioneering businesswoman. She is also a park ranger at the Rosie the Riveter World War II Homefront National Historical Park in Richmond, California, and a leading spokesperson for the diverse experiences of domestic war effort workers during World War II. She is the author of the 2018 memoir, Sign My Name to Freedom, available for checkout from our library and for purchase online from SO1 Books, a Los Angeles-based independent Black-owned bookshop. Betty worked with female Bay Area shipyard workers during World War II. Welcome, Betty.
Well, thank you very much. I feel like I'm really sort of changing the way I want to be presented. I had never been presented as Rosie the Riveter because I had never accepted the fact that I was a Rosie. I've always insisted on being Betty.
Well, and that moniker is really, I've heard you share before. It's like you feel it doesn't really apply to you. It's a white women's story.
Absolutely.
You know that African American women have been working
yes.
since before slavery, and so it's a very different story. But still, you share that, you're willing to share that story with folks through your work at the national park.
Yes.
And that's appreciated. So I'd like to go back even before World War II, because you had just turned 9 years old when the Depression hit.
Yes.
And I'm wondering how that changed your family's life.
I'm not sure that I would be aware of how that changed my family's life. I'm sure that there had to be changes. I'm not sure that I ever realized that there was a depression. I had no idea what depression was. So there'd be no way for me to really understand what was going on.
So I would guess that you may have been growing up in a household full of love, and it didn't didn't change when the depression hit. So that's but then your family did move out of the South as really part of that Great Migration. And I don't know if our viewers are, I hope they're aware that thousands, millions of African Americans moved out of the South, and they went west and they went north. And you all ended up in California.
Yes.
So, so can you talk about how and why your family came to California?
That turned out to be quite something. There was a huge flood in New Orleans in 1927. It wasn't a hurricane, but it acted as Katrina did, so that the same losses would have occurred. Yes, the flood happened, and the city fathers were watching it come down the Mississippi, and it was going to hit New Orleans, and it did. They bombed the levees that would have saved the 7th and 9th wards, and the Chimay,
Mm-hmm.
but they were looking to save St. Charles Avenue. They did.
But at a cost
Mm.
of those wards.
At a cost that to my family at least was total. We lost everything and came to California.
Mm-hmm.
I was 6, I think.
That's, I mean, it's heart-wrenching, you know, yet thankfully you all survived. I
Yes.
mean, you know, and thankfully, I mean, we're blessed because you came to California.
Yes.
So then you find yourself in California
Yes.
as a young child, as a teenager. What was the Bay Area like at that time for you?
It was very, very different. My grandfather's house, which is where we landed, was the house furthest west in Oakland. There was nothing between my grandfather's house and the Oakland airport. It was all Tules.
So like that area around Davis, California, between like Davis and Sacramento, where it's like the Tules, and
Yes,
you were,
I think that's true.
and now it's obviously incredibly built up.
Yes, no, it's completely built up.
So did you, as a child, did you experience discrimination that you recall as a child or teenager?
I wouldn't have known.
Mm-hmm.
Because my family was my world.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea of anything beyond school and being a part of the family.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't have known discrimination until I was much older.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then World War II came along.
Yes.
And how did that change your life?
That changed my life and my husband's life considerably. My husband was a 3rd generation Californian. His family had come out here since before the Civil War, so that he had no idea of what discrimination would be as it was formally.
Mm-hmm.
I came out when I was 6 years old. We were married when I was 20 and he was 23. By that time, we had been almost buried under by migrants who were coming to California.
Yeah, the great migration out of the Dust Bowl and everything else. So you actually, I believe, just being patriotic, you started working for what was then called the Army Air Force, correct?
No, I started working with the CIA, or maybe it was, I'm not sure. It was in the basement of the federal building in San Francisco, and there were many, many tables, and we sat all day filing cards, blue and red cards that were bar and flag cards against the cards that were brought in by the workers who were being tested. And that's when I decided, because my parents believed that because there was a war on, because there were blackouts occurring, that I might be caught in San Francisco. So I came over to the 7th Bay and enlisted the Air Force to work the Leamington Hotel. And that was the same time that Mel went off. He was a football player. He played left halfback for the San Francisco Dons. He was very, very well known. And he applied. He enlisted to work to fight for his country. But he found that he was in Great Lakes, and the only thing he could do would be to cook for his country, because Black people were not allowed to do anything beyond that.
So that
So
would be
that-
one thing if he was a cook, but he wasn't a cook. He was ready. He was a
He
fighting weight and
lasted 3 days because he would not accept that. And he
You
was
know.
on his way home. And I was at the Air Force for the 3 days. And I saw the little girl, desk abutted mine, called up to the lieutenant in charge of the section and told that I was Black.
This was a surprise to them?
Yes. It was a surprise for me because I didn't know why anybody would think I was Black. So I walked up to him when she got back, and I discovered what she'd been told. And I asked him who had told him that I was not Black. And he said, "It doesn't matter, Betty. I've talked with the people who work with you, and they're satisfied that you can work here." And I said, "But will they work under me?" Because I was in line for an upgrade.
Yeah, you were going to be promoted.
Yeah.
And what did he say?
He paused long enough for me to go back to my desk and grab my purse and walk out. I walked out of the Air Force and got home and found a telegram from Mel that he was coming home. So we failed patriotism.
Did not fail anything. You two answered the call.
Yes.
And were both met with discrimination.
Yes. But that's when we discovered that what we were was perfectly all right.
And I would say, yes, you were perfectly all right. So in essence, you were passing as a white woman. Has that ever?
I was never passing as anything. I was Betty, and I was just exactly who I am today.
Exactly. And it's just, so, but you didn't give up on your country, certainly. You ended up going to work for...
No. I worked for the shipyards. I worked out for the Boilermakers out in the middle of Richmond. I never saw a ship being built or a ship being launched because we were not anywhere near the shipyards. Mel worked on the swing shift at night and at a playground director's role in the daytime. And I worked.
And to be specific, you were working for the Black Auxiliary Lodge of the International Boilermakers Union.
Yes.
And it had to be distinguished as the Black Auxiliary Lodge because it was segregated.
Yes. In fact, all of the Black men were hired in 1943. And all of the Black women were hired as workers, as welders. They were trained as welders in 1945.
And they were building ships. And were you...
They built one ship in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
That
That is
Henry,
incredible.
yes, they built 787 ships in 4 or 5 years.
And was your role, were you a file clerk for the union? Were you?
I don't remember. I'm file card. I always seemed to be a file clerk. I always seemed
Because you're smart and you're organized.
I always seemed to be that, and I was that until we opened the music store.
So talk to me about that. That is Reid's Records.
Yes,
And
that was a wonderful, that gave us a place to land where we could be ourselves, and where we were dealing with Black culture in a way that no one else was.
so Tower Records didn't exist,
No,
but also my local drugstore probably wouldn't have carried.
there were no records. There were no Black businesses. I think west of Chicago. I just don't think that there was a record store.
Mm-hmm. And well, I had read a bio on Tower Records, and the gentleman that started that, his dad was selling records in a drugstore in Sacramento.
Yes.
And he started Tower Records, but they wouldn't have carried the music that you were carrying.
No. Our records were called race records. Mm. They were not considered anything except for trash.
But it was amazing music. And it also was gospel music, was it not? Or did that come later?
No, that came much later.
Okay.
It was jazz and blues and R&B.
And where was your first record store?
In Berkeley. And the second one was in Oakland, and the third was in Vallejo.
Okay. And were these records, because were you selling them at first out of your garage and then it expanded?
Absolutely.
And did you guys cut a window in your garage so you could sell these records?
We cut a window in the wall of the garage, and we stacked the records in orange crates behind the wall. And we had our money in a cigar box. Mm-hmm. The safe was our Bendix washing machine out in the back of the store.
There you go. And that really, that allowed you most likely to be a working mom. It allowed you to be independent.
Yes.
And
because my husband was playing football still, okay. And was working. Yes. He played for the Oakland Giants and also the Honolulu Warriors.
Okay. And so sometimes you were at home alone with the kids. Yes. When he was traveling.
Yeah.
But you did more than sell music. I mean, you yourself, I know you write music, you sing music. So music has really played a large role in your life.
Yes, but I didn't know at the time that was going to be.
Okay.
That came much later.
So what has music taught you, whether it's the record store or just the music you've done yourself?
I think that when I started writing music, I thought I was remembering music, because I never wrote anything that took more than 10 minutes. And when the war was over, and after the 10 years was up, I put the songs away in a shoebox
Mhm.
on my back of my closet, and they weren't discovered until very recently.
So one of those songs was Your Hand in Mine,
Yes.
which is a song about Fannie Lou Hamer. Can you tell us about that song?
Oh, that was wonderful. That was when I was watching Fannie Lou Hamer at the Democratic convention, and she was trying to get her delegation seated. And the president wouldn't hear her. She made a wonderful speech, but it didn't bring anything. And not long after that, maybe a year, 2 years, the same president I heard on television quoting the lines from Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream. And I knew that Your Hand in Mine was a hand-holding song.
Mhm.
And the next week, I was supposed to lead a song in my church. And I wrote Your Hand in Mine. And it was something that I never did hear or think of as being anything original.
But
I wrote it.
you wrote it. So speaking of your church, in your 2018 book, Sign My Name to Freedom, again, available for checkout from the library, you talk about a parade in 1963 where you experienced really overt discrimination. I think you were lined up in the cars and
I remember that.
can you tell us about that?
Yes, that was during the time when the 4 little girls were shot and killed.
Was that the bombing in Birmingham?
Yes,
Yeah, the bomb.
that was bombed.
Yeah.
And that day, that week, was a Walnut Festival in Walnut Creek. And I got a friend to drive a new convertible from the store.
Mm-hmm.
And we sat in the blazing sun of a hot, hot day, waiting to join the parade. We had decorated the car. I was seated on the back of the convertible with a black veil over my head.
Appropriate given what happened that week.
And we sat there for about 2 hours in the sun. And they kept waving people in. They finally waved us into line, allowing at least a block before and a block after us.
So you were going down the parade route as if
Yeah.
you weren't in the parade, as if you had mistakenly found your way.
And we could hear all of the hisses. And I remember wondering if the children in the car could hear them. I never knew.
Yeah. I'm so sorry that happened, especially given what had happened that week.
Yeah.
But if
I'm glad that that those girls were recognized finally.
Yes, and fairly recently. I mean, given how long ago this happened.
Yes.
So I was wondering if we could switch gears to the Rosie the Riveter World War II Homefront National Historical Park, because before that even was built or anything, you were involved in it. When did you first hear about the concept that they wanted to build this?
I was working as a field representative for a member of the California State Assembly.
Okay.
I was working with Leon Area, and when Leon term limited out, I stayed on and worked for Lonnie Hancock.
Okay.
And I was sitting in on all of the meetings that were held in our assembly district. Rosie the Riveter was one of those seats. I was still there 4 years later, but I don't remember why. I don't remember. Oh, I was a consultant. I stopped working for the state and started working for the parks.
And
that was a wonderful thing for me to do, because I found that the park had been created as an homage to the women who had taken the place of men who were fighting overseas, but that was only part of the story. That story was much, much fuller than that. That there were 120,000 Japanese who were locked up, who were in concentration camps all over the southern states.
yes.
I'm sorry, the western states.
Yeah, the Japanese Americans who were interned.
There were also but Mexicans who'd been brought here to take the place, to pick the cotton, to pick the root, the fruit was ripened when the Japanese were taken away, and they were not a part of the story. There was an explosion in Port Chicago. There were 320 men lost their lives, and they were not at all. So that by broadening that story, it became a home front story.
The real home front.
Yes, it turned out to be an amazing story, one that was deserving of having a park named for it.
I mean, you just explained, you just answered my next question, which was, how did you ensure everyone was represented in the park? But you stood up, you were the champion for those people.
Yes, I was. I didn't know that that's what I was doing, but that's what I did.
Well, you made it a richer experience for those.
Yes.
And also, so that a young Mexican-American girl or an African-American boy or Japanese-American boy can go to that park and see their ancestors and see themselves.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. There were 5 or 6 women who used to come to the park. I think that they were involved in the beginnings of the park because they were the Rosies. And they met every Friday afternoon with the public. And they did that as long as I was there. And I was always separate from them. But they were the Rosies.
Mhm.
And
Well, they were that mythic white woman,
yes,
but you made sure that everyone's voices were
yes,
represented. So I would say mission accomplished. You could have gone along on your way because you made sure those people were represented. But for some reason, at the age of 85,
yes.
you decided to become a ranger.
Well, they sort of dropped a uniform on me, and I became a ranger, but I didn't know that I wasn't anybody. I was still Betty.
You're always Betty.
Yes,
But I mean, I applaud that because you, I think, were making sure that those stories continue to be told.
absolutely. And they're still being told.
I mean, they're represented there because of your actions, but because you worked, for these last
Yes,
15 years as a park ranger, you've
yes,
made sure. And I think as the pandemic has hit, right, you've continued to do that from your home, I imagine.
yes. I'm doing it on Zoom.
Mhm.
So every Thursday at 2 o'clock from 2 to 3.
And folks can tune in and hear the story.
Yes.
That's awesome. Well, I don't think most people, I mean, at least down here in Southern California, do not know that that park exists. Until I read your story, I didn't know that park existed. And so I guess you often wear your uniform even when you're not working. Why do you feel it's important for people to see you in that uniform?
Because the West Coast has very little presence in terms of parks.
Mm-hmm.
And because when I'm wearing that uniform, little girls watch me and they are so enamored of me that I feel like I need to wear it because that's what gives them a way in to employment.
You're in essence giving them permission to be anything they want to be.
Yes, yes,
I mean, that's beautiful. And I think you're a walking advertisement for the park as well.
yes,
And
because I'm the only, I'm one of 2 Black people at the park.
Mhm. And certainly, most likely, the only one that was actually walking the streets of Richmond
Yes.
when those things were happening. Um, so what pieces of the history that you share at the park might surprise people?
I don't really know.
You mentioned one, so the explosion, right? Was
Yes.
that, yeah.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about that? Because there were survivors.
There were survivors, but there were 320 men who lost their lives. 202 of them were Black. All of the officers were white men. All of the men who loaded the ships were Black men. They were loading munitions for the South Pacific.
And
Or
there were some of them that didn't want to go back after that explosion to work.
there were 50 men who refused to go back and load the ships because they did not understand what had happened.
And what happened to those 50 men?
They were tried and found guilty of mutiny.
Because they didn't want to go back and risk their lives again.
Yes.
I mean, it's just, it just.
There have been, there's a group that's called Friends of Fort Chicago who's been working ever since to free those men from memory, to get them exonerated.
Mhm.
There have been only one exoneration, and that was Freddie Meeks, who under President Clinton was exonerated, was pardoned.
Mhm.
They didn't believe that they had done anything wrong and refused to be pardoned. They insisted that they were to be exonerated.
Mhm.
They're all dead now.
Yeah. Well, we can only hope that that group is still successful, even if it's posthumously,
Yeah.
that those men can be exonerated.
Yes.
So then looking at the women, and I'm specifically thinking of the African-American women and others that, worked in those yards, worked in factories, right? Because
Yes.
the men were gone. And so even, the tuna
They were
soup
driving.
factory had to
They were,
be.
yes.
What's the legacy? What's the legacy of those women, do you think?
Betty Friedan. He convinced them all that they shouldn't be tucked away.
Mhm.
So when her book came out, it changed the whole thing.
Mhm. Well, and it's interesting because I saw advertisements from the federal government as the war ended that were
Yes.
like, well, now it's time to go home and be a
Yes,
housewife.
absolutely.
Resume your role
And
of domestic bliss.
most of us went back home and did
Mhm.
that.
Mhm. And it would be many years later, but women had
Yes.
had that freedom, had
Yeah.
the taste of it, and we can only hope that it's what made things more equal for women. But we both know things are not 100% equal
No,
even to this day. So, so you've had many different jobs in your life. What's been your favorite?
my last one.
Yeah,
It's always the last one.
whatever the last one is,
Yes.
or so then
Because I've never seeked a job. I've never looked for work. I've never been without work. I don't think I ever would have become anything except that I spent a lot of years being content. Yes, I think the fact that 3 men in my life, my first husband, my father, and my second husband, all died within 3 months. And I had never known who it was that I was being, because I'd always been defined by the men in my life.
Mhm. And suddenly you had a new independence, even though it was a very sad
I
time.
found myself in 3 months absolutely spinning around in space, wondering who I was. And I found her. And I've been that ever since.
Well, you're still Betty to me.
Yes.
So speaking of prominent men, and a woman, you met the Obamas.
Yeah.
Tell me what was that like?
Oh, that was wonderful. That was, I was invited by the Secretary of the Interior to attend the tree lighting ceremony in Washington, and to introduce the president to the country on television. And that was absolutely wonderful. I remember him coming across the stage and grabbing me and kissing me on the forehead. And I didn't know until then that in my hand was a purse that had my picture of my great-grandmother, who was a freed slave,
Mhm.
a string of pearls that had
Been handed down.
yes, and a coin that had been given to me moments before by the president. And that we were there standing on the stage in the shadow of the White House, which was built by slaves.
Mhm.
And that was all in a matter of minutes. That all of that was standing on that stage. And
That must have hit you like
yeah,
a ton of bricks. I mean, and you just think about those men who built the White House. You think about your freed great
yeah.
great grandmother, and
And
it is
he didn't know that,
no.
that I knew something that the president didn't know.
Wow, it was, I saw the film footage of that and it was just so sweet. And you were in your uniform because you were,
Yes.
and people may not, some people I'm sure know the Secretary of the Interior, the parks report up
Yeah.
to. And so he was your boss's 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 boss
Yeah.
and invited you. And I mean,
He didn't know that.
yeah. So, but that's not all. I guess I don't think when anyone lives to be 100, they get this gift. I think when Betty gets to be 100, she gets a middle school named after her.
Yes, yes.
So what was that like?
That was absolutely wonderful. That was absolutely wonderful. I had no idea. I keep forgetting about it. But I really, really do appreciate having that school name for me, because it means that all of those kids will be sometimes grown-ups and will have children of their own, and they will all remember that school was named for me.
Mhm. I mean, I had my school, my elementary school, I still remember the name. I know it was named after a famous aviator. So those kids, they're going to
Yep.
know that story and they're going to know the story of you.
Yes.
And so is there, before we go, is there any question I didn't ask or anything you wish to mention that we didn't cover?
No, I can't think of anything.
Okay. Well, I wish for people to know you, and that's why we wanted to do this. You're a remarkable and incredible woman. I wanted them to know about the Rosie the Riveter World War II Homefront National Historical Park, that they will hopefully visit it when they're in the Bay Area.
I hope.
The legacy of that space is so incredible, and I really want to thank you very much for being with us here today. And I feel so fortunate to have shared this conversation with you in honor of Rosie the Riveter Day, even though she has a history, and also the UN's International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination.
Yes.
And on behalf of my colleagues at the Glendale Library Arts and Culture Department and the City of Glendale and our Arts and Culture Commission, I want to thank our audience for tuning in. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. And I want to thank Betty Reid Soskin. And please check out Betty's book, Sign My Name to Freedom. Again, it's available from the library at glac.info/Reid Soskin, or you can purchase it from SO1 Books, an independent Black-owned bookshop in Los Angeles. You can visit them on the web at www.esowonbookstore.com. Betty, thank you so much. It's been such an honor and such a privilege, and I want to wish you well. And thank you for your service to your country. Thank you for all you've done for us. And thank you for making sure that the stories are told and that that park truly represents everyone.
Thank you very much.
I have a new friend in the Bay Area. So nice to meet you.
Thank
my
you.
best to your family.
Thank
and I wish you well.
Thank you.
Good night, Betty.
Night.